Let's start, though, with the game of the day, probably one of the games of the season when it's all said and done. The Vikings beat the Bills 33-30, an absolutely wild one. I'm going to start this conversation with a question that I've posed several times to several different people on this podcast so far this season. The Vikings are 8-1. Are the Vikings good?
They might be above the equator in DVOA after this week. They might be above 18th overall. And it's kind of wild because you watch them and you see like a lot of good things that they do. And you're like, yeah, I really believe in it. But they also do some stuff they don't believe in, and they just have that inherent like Vikings history. And unfortunately, what we think of Cousins the quarterback and kind of his ability to do it in the playoffs and on the bigger stages. And it feels like they're a good team. They obviously don't feel like an 8-1 team. And I think that's kind of where the disconnect lies, is we don't know how to kind of properly evaluate them and properly place them in amongst the, NFL elite.
So I have two or three different elements of this game that have caused me to think a little bit differently about the Vikings now than I did when I woke up this morning. The first involves Justin Jefferson. Today was a reminder that Justin Jefferson is truly one of the 5-10 elite players in the NFL, the plays that he made in this game. I want to say that 8 of his catches in this game, according to Next Gen Stats, Beller can pull up the tweet and the stat, but I want to say 8 catches that he had in this game. 9 receptions that he had in this game, according to Next Gen Stats, had a sub 50% completion probability, which when you watch that game, that's what it felt like. Every single time he went up to make a play, it was a 50-50 ball. It was a contested catch. I mean, obviously, we'll talk about the 4th and 18 catch. Maybe the best catch I've ever seen in terms of stakes, what it was like in the moment, when it came in the game, everything about the mechanics of it. Was that the best catch you've ever seen?
I think so, when you put all those things together, because I mean, it's 4th and 18. You're making an Odell-like catch, except the other guy kind of caught it too, and then you have the physical strength to like snatch it from him, which my shoulder, one, I wouldn't have had the mobility to do it because I have O-line shoulders, and 2, the strength to just like reach from behind your head and pull with enough force to yank the ball from a guy who has 2 hands on it. Again, 4th down.
His hand on it coming down. The fact that he kept it in one hand through contact and through hitting the ground, it was absolutely insane. So we all know Justin Jefferson is good. My concern over the first, let's say, 8 weeks of the season with Justin Jefferson, Kirk Cousins, and the composition of this offense is that they weren't pushing the ball down the field at all. Kirk Cousins through 8 weeks was 33rd of 35 quarterbacks in air yards per target. It's about 6 air yards per throw. Okay. Justin Jefferson had 7 targets of 20 plus air yards over the first 8 weeks. He's had 7 over the last 2 games. Over the last 2 games, Kirk Cousins is averaging 9.2 air yards per target, which is 6th among all 32 quarterbacks. So if I'm going to see the offense in a different way, them willing to push the ball down the field and them willing to be more aggressive with some of these 50-50 tight window, however you want to describe them, throws to Jefferson, that is a very good starting point. Because if you're going to allow him to make these sorts of plays, then who you are as an offense changes in my mind. And I think that's an important step in kind of reconfiguring what we think about whether this team is actually good at football.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And you have to wonder, obviously teams are going to go into the year and say, all right, we can't let this guy beat us. We can't let him beat us deep. We got a new offensive coach, and you're kind of wondering, what part of it is scheme, what part of it is what the Vikings are choosing to do, and what the defense is dictating to them. And then there's games like today where you just realize, like, dude, just throw it to him. Like, just throw it up to him. Yeah. And it's like what we've seen with Burrow and Chase. Like, Burrow just throws it up to him, and he does it to all his receivers, but he kind of just empowers his big guys and his good players to go get it and to have fun and to like the challenge of coming down with it in 2-on-1 situations. And so whether the Vikings are doing something different structurally the last couple of weeks, whether they've told Kirk, like, dude, just throw to him. Like, even if it's not, quote unquote, classically open, you got to trust your guy, or whether something sparked and he realized today he just had to do it to have a chance. I think it's awesome for the offense. And like you said, you can't dink and dunk and have a guy that good and that explosive and not utilize his full tool bag. And so if they're able to do that more consistently and kind of, defenses are saying, all right, we're going to play, too high, or we're going to play whatever and take away Jefferson deep, and you're still shredding them and you're still throwing it to him when he's double covered, he's coming down with it. That changes your offense drastically. And, this offense is built on kind of run game, play action, under center stuff. And if you're forced now to, stay back there because they're pushing the ball down the field, it drastically changes that run game and what they can do up front.
The other element of their offense that I was really encouraged by today, the thing I was most worried about, beyond the air yard stuff, beyond their inability to push the ball down the field over the first 8 weeks or so, the interior of the offensive line was a disaster. Like the way that the right guard was playing and at times the center and the left guard, I was consistently worried about their ability to hold up. And in this game, I thought they played much, much better. There were a couple of moments, I think it was the 3rd and 9 late in the second quarter, where Cousins held out for a long time before finding Hockenson over the middle of the field. And he just didn't have that sort of time in those sorts of moments for long stretches of this season. And so if they can play better up front on offense and they're willing to push the ball down the field, which those things can happen in concert with each other, that makes me a lot more bullish on the offensive side of the ball. And then extending kind of this trenches conversation, I thought they outplayed the Bills up front on both sides of the ball in this game. I thought that Harrison Phillips had some really nice moments. Z had some really big, not sacks, but pressures on 3rd down that sped Allen up. And if they can outplay people on offense and defense up front, then we're really talking here, because they have not been able to do that so far this year. On defense, they have. Like their pass rush is good, but on offense, they haven't. So that was the other kernel of like, okay, if this is going to be different, then I can talk and think about you differently than I have been so far this season.
Right. And first off, thank you for not using the offensive linemen's names when you were saying that they weren't playing so well. I appreciate you just phoning up positions.
It doesn't really matter.
No,
Number
it does, because
67 has not been playing
we get
so well.
talked about like worst case scenario typically. So I appreciate you're just kind of pointing out positions and people don't have in their head like, oh, that guy sucks. So I do actually appreciate that. But yeah, to your point, I think the interior of the offensive line. So there's quarterbacks kind of fall into buckets of would they rather have their outside feel more protected, would they rather have the inside. Cousins isn't a guy who's necessarily going to break the pocket and look to run and throw on the run. And so you're talking about a guy who's a little bit more of a true pocket passer when he does throw it. And those guys tend to like feeling secure up the middle, because that's where they need to step into the throw. That's where they're going to drive the throw from. If they do move in the pocket, it's going to be very minimal, kind of laterally, just to avoid things. But that middle of the pocket, being solidified, feeling good about things, is absolutely a huge thing. And, you see other teams and they put a lot of money, they put a lot of emphasis on securing those inside 3, because that's what makes the quarterback feel comfortable. And so kind of regardless of, what their specific scheme is, what their thoughts are, that inside, being able to do that now allows you, like you said, those 3rd and longs where the offense isn't necessarily at its greatest ability to, push the ball down the field. Maybe that extra half second that does allow Jefferson to beat double coverage, that does allow someone else to get open when they're shifting to Jefferson. Maybe on 2nd and 8, they run the ball and they get that little bit more push, and now it's 3rd and 3 instead of 3rd and 5, and that can change what you're doing offensively. It makes a really big difference. And to have that kind of test against the Buffalo front that we've seen all season cause havoc, and not just the edge guys, we've seen Ed Oliver and Jordan Phillips, and really the whole kind of front 8 or front 10 of what Buffalo's bringing on the defensive side, just completely shred teams and really take over games. And for the Vikings O-line to, match that test and, like you said, outplay them on both sides of the ball, as you mentioned, especially on the inside of the offensive line, it really is a good stepping stone for them, and you just have to build on that. And yeah, I think, we expected their defensive line, Minnesota's, to be good and to be able to rush the passer. Obviously, the guys on the edge kind of leading that charge a little bit. But Buffalo was kind of playing a little bit, less Josh Allen throwing the ball down the field early on. It did feel like they were, trying to take a few throws off his plate, lean a little bit more on the run, a little bit more on physicality, see if they can play that style of game. And Minnesota responded well. They got to Allen in the pass game, but they also did some good things up front, defending the run.